Hallo, ich bin Hans und heute werden wir install the front sway bar on your BMW M2, M3, and M4 F8x chassis. But really though, this bar is pretty heavy. Alright, so let's take a look at the stock and the M2 CS Racing sway bars. So as you can see, the M2 CS Racing is much thicker. This is a 30 millimeter bar the entire length across. And you can see on the stock sway bar, well, it has a larger outer diameter and then a thinner inner diameter middle section. This outer diameter here is 28.4 millimeters and the thinner section is 24.8 millimeters. So, if you're trying to do calculations to see what stiffness this bar is, it's going to be closer to this 24.8 millimeter section rather than the larger one. Additionally, this CSR bar is solid. It's not hollow at all. It's just one solid bar, and that also means it weighs a lot. It's 17 pounds and 6 ounces. The stock sway bar on the M2 competition is hollow, and this bar is only 8 pounds 2 ounces. Now, I've heard some people say that their CS Racing bar, they've found an H&R marking, saying like, hey, this is the same bar as H&R sells. On mine, I could not find any such marking. I have this BMW part number over here. You have another marking over on the other side of the bar, and that was it. There was no H&R marking on mine. That said, this does have some characteristics that H&R does do on their bars, such as these index tabs where the bushings go. My other H&R bar for the F8x M2 has a very, very, very similar stopping. As you can see, it is different from the one on the stock bar. Let's also take a look at the bushings for the new bar. You can see, unlike the two-piece stock bushings, these are now single piece, and they just have this one opening to pop this over the bar. It still has these two, tabs on the side to lock into the bushing mount, or sorry, the bracket, and it has this locating tab on top, just like the stock bushings do. One thing that is different about this, though, is on the inside. I don't know how well you can see this, but it's got this kind of like a fabric or threaded weave in here, and if you touch it, it's actually quite smooth. So this is to allow the bar to freely rotate inside the bushings, unlike the stock bushings, which really capture the bar and prevent it from rotating freely. So there is not a, let's say, natural position. And because it's got this really nice skid layer here, I don't think that you actually are supposed to grease these on the CS Racing bars. I know for the stock bar for sure, BMW's instructions say do not get any oil or grease on the bar, the bushing, or the bracket. And they must have much smarter kids in Germany than they do in the US, because interestingly enough, this bushing smells so much like candy. Like if I was 5 years old, I would totally try to eat this. All right, everybody, you can see I've got the car up in the air here now, and also notice that I am going to be leaving both of the front wheels on, because you don't actually have to take them off to do a sway bar swap, although you may want to if you just want to get a little bit more clearance. But anyhow, right, you only need to get the front axle up in the air, and that means you can go ahead and use the two jack points on the front on both of the sides to support the vehicle. Right, you can see the boxes there, and I guess you can try and use this center jack point to get the car up there. Now I'm just doing this on my quick jacks just because, well, that's easy. And once the car is in the air, then what we need to do is we need to remove the under trays over here. So this front under tray, and on the M2 it's one single piece that goes all the way across the front of the car. On the M3 and M4, right, you have separate quarter front panels over here versus the center main panel. So to go ahead and undo those. And to do that, you're going to find a very high number of these 8 millimeter screws. I've taken a couple of mine out already that are going to be along the underside, and then also some may be on the inside of the wheel well over here too. Additionally, on the M2s we have this E10 bolt, two of them, so one on each side of the kind of oil cooler down here that we also need to remove in order to pull out this lower shield. And once all those 8 millimeter screws and the E10s have been released, well, we can go ahead and pull out this lower cover. Alright, the next thing we have to remove are these little side panels, and once again it just has a myriad of these little 8mm screws holding it to like the shear plate down here, as well as, you know, the body. So we're just going to go ahead and release all of those and then slide this cover right out. Next we're going to be removing the shear plate on the bottom, and to do this we have a couple more of these 8mm screws along the periphery. And you can also see that there are a number of 16mm bolts holding the shear plate to the subframe, and we'll need to remove those as well. Now the 16mm bolts holding up the shear plate are torqued to a decently good torque spec, so just keep in mind, you know, you may want to use like a good impact, or at least maybe a breaker bar to get them loose. But once you do, then you can just, you know, hold up this plate, take out your last bolt. And this plate is pretty solid. It's got a decent amount of weight to it, so just be aware of that. But then we can lower it and get it out of the way. Alright, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to remove these two 8mm screws on these upper panels here. And the reason why you would do that is so you can shift this panel out of the way to give yourself a little bit more room down here when you're undoing the end link from the sway bar. If you have a really low profile T30, you don't need to do this, but otherwise you probably will. And, you know, like I said, it's just these two screws. So with these panels now released, we can now uncouple them up top. There's these little hangers that they, or these little plastic clips that they hang on. And then we can just rotate this rear one up like that to give us enough room back here behind the end link. And that's all we need to do. Next we can begin releasing the end link, and so this is a 16mm nut, and then the threaded rod attached to the ball joint is a T30 counterhold. Just to break it loose, you don't really need a counterhold, just go ahead and get your 16mm on there, and then torque it. And then once that's broken free, go ahead and get your T30 counterhold in there, and then you can continue removing that nut till it's all the way off and the end link is free. And then once that nut is off, go ahead and take the end link and slide it out of the sway bar. The sway bars are typically under tension, so you may have to like bend it a little bit. You see how the sway bar wanted to spring up back into the natural position, so you may have to just, you know, bend it a little bit in order to slide the end link out. The last thing we have to do to take the sway bar out is take our 13mm and undo the two bolts, one on the, you know, front and rear side, or sorry, the nuts of the sway bar mounting bracket. And then let's go ahead and take the bar right out. Okay, so this next part's actually kind of tricky, and that's removing the bracket from the sway bar bushing on the sway bar. As you can see, there's this locking tab right here that secures the bracket to the bushing. And so what you need to do is you need to take a flathead screwdriver, get in under it here, and then pry this arm of the bracket outwards so that you can go up and over this locking tab. Once again, this is not the easiest thing out there. So I've got my screwdriver in there, I've pried it up, and now I'm pulling this bracket off over the bushing. Then we can go ahead and, you see, we take the top of the bushing off and then peel the bottom bushing off as well. And unlike the, you know, the regular 2, 3, 4 series, the F2X and F3X cars, you saw how easily these bushings came off of the sway bar. So on the F8Xs, right, the M2, M3, M4, the bushings are not bonded to the sway bar like they are on the regular 2, 3, 4 series. That said, you know, you saw how these things were clamped on the sway bar, and there's no grease in here, it's just pure rubber. So BMW is still setting the sway bar to a natural normal position. So if you are changing your ride height, what that means is you're going to be preloading your bar, because the bracket and these bushings with the tension that they apply to here are going to want to spring the sway bar back to where it is at stock ride height. All right, so let's prep the new bar for installation. If you look at how I have this bar oriented, this is how it would be oriented on the car, right? So this arm goes down, then it comes up, and it bends down again. So if this is going to be installed in the car, the brackets and bushings are going to be kind of oriented like this, right, with the bottom of this facing up. And the reason I want to do that is because if you look at these brackets, you can just see right here, right, both sides are not the same. And so what that means is we need to make sure that this is indexed properly, because once you get this over the tabs well, it's a lot more difficult to take off. So what we're going to do is first we're going to go ahead and take this bushing and put it over. There's no front or rear side on this. It doesn't really matter. So we're just going to split that open and slide it over the bar. And then you can see I have the bottom side up. Then we're going to go ahead and match that with the bracket, and so the bracket is going to be with this side facing the rear of the car, right, with these two holes. So I'm going to go ahead and do it this way so that I don't put these in backwards, because yeah, like I said, it's kind of a pain if you do, and then you have to fix it later. So I'm making sure that that little nub up top is going to go into the index hole there, and then I'm just pulling this over till these two side tabs lock into their respective slots on the bracket. There's that one too. All right, we're good to go. And you can see by me, rotating this on here and sliding it back and forth, that that weave of whatever material they have, that fabric on the inside of the bushing, does a really good job of reducing friction such that the bar can articulate within the bushing, and that there is no natural position that this is going to want to spring back to. Okay, now we're back under the car, and we're going to put the new sway bar in place. And so what we have to do is, you can see here, I'm rotating the arm up and kind of over the tie rod, and then I'm rotating it so that I can align the bracket with the mounting holes on the subframe. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and once that's aligned, then I can go ahead and start taking those nuts and just securing it. All right, then we can finish fastening these 13mm nuts. And then go ahead and take your torque wrench and set it to 28 Newton meters or 21 foot-pounds, and get these all torqued to their final torque. Okay, now with the sway bar in, we can go ahead and attach the end link. And I am just going to use the farthest hole, which is the softest. When I looked at the manual for the M2 CS Racing, BMW actually recommends starting on the softest. Then we can go ahead and put the 16mm nut on here. Then go ahead and get your 16mm wrench or pass-through and your T30 counter hold, and go ahead and tighten this nut down. Now, because I've got this SPL arm here, there's reduced clearance over the stock arm, so this was a little bit trickier for me. And what I ended up doing on this side was I ended up using the ratchet with the counter hold to kind of spin the ball joint and hold the nut in place. Just because there wasn't that much swing clearance for this wrench here with this SPL arm. But if you're using the stock arms, well, you probably won't have this issue. Then go ahead and get your torque wrench on there and torque this to 56 Newton meters or 41 foot-pounds. Alright, next we can go ahead and put these covers back. So I'm going to take the rear one, I'm just going to rotate it back into place. And there's a clip up at the top here that I need to make sure that this sits on. Then we can go ahead and take the forward piece, which is out because it just falls out. And then we'll go ahead and do the same thing, get that up in there, get it on the clip up top, and then back here, these two pieces also clip together. Don't forget the two screws that go on the top, one on each of the front and the rear shields, and then you can just tighten those down to hand tight snug. Alright, next I'm going to put this shear plate back up into place, and I'm going to get all of these 16mm bolts into it. And then once you have all these bolts up into the shear plate, you can go ahead and take your torque wrench with 16mm, and if you have new bolts, go ahead and torque them to 56 Newton meters, 41 foot-pounds, and then do plus additional 90 degrees. If you're reusing your bolts like I am, Just do the 56 Newton meters or 41 foot-pounds, and do not do the extra 90 degrees. Also, don't forget about the 3 8mm screws at the back of the shear plate, like I was about to. And then these just need to get fastened to a hand-tight snug. Next, we can put these little side covers back on, and if you look towards the front, you can see there's a letter. This one says R for right side. So I know I've got the right one over here. And we'll just slide it into place. And then we can start fastening it with all those myriad of 8mm screws. And then we're just going to tighten these, hand tight snug. And then the last cover we have is these main bottom covers. And once again, if you have an M3 and M4, it's going to be multi-piece. And for this M2, well, it's just one big single piece, which is kind of more difficult to work with in my opinion. But anyhow, got to get this up into place, and then we'll fasten it with all those multitude of 8mm screws. And then all the screws in here, including the E10s, just need to be done hand tight snug. And with that last bottom cover on, it's time to send the car down. So there you have it, everybody. That is the front sway bar change on your F8x M2, M3, and M4. And I know conventional wisdom would say, well, by going to a stiffer front bar, you're inducing understeer. But with the McPherson front struts of the BMWs, what we're actually trying to do too is we're trying to reduce the amount of compression or travel that wheel does. And what that ends up doing is that'll keep us in a part of the camber curve where you have more negative camber. As the suspension compresses, you actually start to lose negative camber past a certain point, so that's what we're trying to prevent. Of course, it is possible with too stiff of a front bar that you can get into understeer. However, I have a friend with an M2 competition and the 30mm H&R aftermarket bar, so should be the same bar as this CS Racing one. And he also has a Fat Cat Motorsports damp suspension in his car, so they've redone the dampers, but he's kept the stock springs. So he's at stock ride height with the M2 CSR bar, and he says his car handles beautifully, and he's got the autocross times to back that up. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how the CS Racing bar does on my M2, and I'll be at the track next weekend to find out.